Story 1. I realized that my parents were not being honest when they said to study hard now so it will be enjoyable when I am older. Story 2. My birth mother took her own life on my 26th birthday, and a month later, my adoptive father experienced severe psychosis and attempted to harm me for using inappropriate language in his presence. I now live with post-traumatic stress disorder. I am 27 years old. Story 3. I'm only 23 years old, and I have experienced a lot. My grandpa and mom both passed away a year apart, and then I faced a traumatic event a few years later. It has been a challenging journey. Story 4. Finding my 16-year-old daughter after she attempted to take her life was incredibly difficult. Thankfully, she survived and is doing really well now. However, I will never be able to get that moment out of my mind. My poor child was in so much pain, and there was nothing I could do to help her. To any parents reading this who have lost a child, my heart goes out to you. That must be the worst experience in the world. Story 5. When my wife miscarried at 12 weeks, I saw the doctor place my baby boy, not a fetus, in a urinal sample cup. I saw his tiny body. Story 6. I had a traumatic birth experience, and while my baby is fine, this led to severe postpartum depression and struggles with alcohol. Unfortunately, my spouse was not supportive and often told me I was being selfish. This culminated in him saying that our 3-month-old baby would be better off without me and that I should take my own life. I wanted to die, but I couldn't leave my baby. So, I am still here, just trying my best every day and coping with my challenges. Story 7. My mother passed away in 2015 while I was completing college. Then my father had a stroke in September 2020. I have a severely handicapped brother who requires care around the clock and was under my father's care when my mother died. When my father had his stroke, I had to care for both him and my brother on my own while also working full-time. It was the hardest and darkest year of my life. The only thing that helped me through was my boss being very accommodating and my father's strong will to recover as much as possible. Things improved when I made the difficult decision to place my brother in a group home. Story 8. Having my fiancée cheat on me with a close friend multiple times before our wedding and still having the nerve to let me invite that friend to the wedding was devastating. Her friends knew about it as well and didn't say a thing. They even gave speeches at our wedding about how amazing she was. What was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life is now one of the worst, as I feel like a total idiot. I am currently in the process of getting divorced from my fiancée, who eventually became my wife. I didn't find this out until we were separated and she texted me the truth during one of her outbursts. Story 9. Probably experiencing my apartment flooding, then getting rear-ended, and then losing my favorite uncle suddenly and unexpectedly, all within the span of not quite 2 months. That's besides the challenges of adulthood, such as chronic illness, constant bills, and a loss of faith in humanity. Story 10. The death of my daughter, or rather losing custody of her in the first place, eventually led to her death 20 years later. Story 11. My dad passed away, all of my grandparents have died, my first cat tragically died, my first rabbit also tragically died, and my marriage is ending. It's not just one thing. Story 12. It is difficult to choose between the traumatic experiences of being a victim of sexual violence, losing a pregnancy due to another assault, suffering a coma following a suicide attempt, or discovering that the person I loved most had manipulated me for years, leaving me feeling deceived and nearly without a home while caring for my child. It has been very challenging. Story 13. Wake up at 6:45 a.m. Shower, shave, and dress. Be at work by 9 a.m. Get home by 5 p.m. Make dinner by 7 p.m. 3 hours of free time, then sleep. Rinse and repeat day in and day out until you have enough money to retire or until you pass away. Sleep and work take up 90% of life. Being an adult feels like slavery with extra steps. Story 14. Today I lost my childhood dog who was 18. He had been there with me through almost everything. I'm 25 now. We adopted him at 8 months in 2008. Story 15. Realizing I don't get the summer off. After reading through the comments, my adulthood hasn't been too bad. Story 16. Realizing I am alone and have to navigate life independently while being unwell at times, tired at times, and emotional at times is challenging. I genuinely dislike having to endure it alone and manage adulthood by myself. Story 17. Getting stalked and realizing no one is coming to save me. No mentors, no parents. It is just me searching for how to fix my life at 2 a.m. Story 18. I am 26 now, so I have not been an adult for that long, but my adulthood has been nowhere near as difficult as my childhood. I grew up with very abusive parents and did not immediately have the opportunity to seek help for my trauma. This led to a breakdown shortly after moving out and starting college when I realized that bullying does not end in high school. It was the most painful period of my life for a time, but the trauma had been accumulating for my entire life. I eventually had the chance to receive help and put my adulthood on a much healthier path than my childhood. Story 19. My mother abandoned my siblings and me a year before she passed away. We were not informed of her death until 14 days later. She was young and had many heart issues, but she kept all of that from us. She has been gone for 1 year as of April 14th, and my heart is more broken than I ever thought possible. She was unrecognizable when I went to the funeral home to view her. She looked peaceful, but not like herself. Everything was different. Story 20. I lost 7 people in the past 5 years, all within the time my first child was born. It has given me such anxiety about the world and my daughter losing her support network because my community has diminished. Part of me has died with them. I feel like I am not the same person anymore. Story 21. Became an extremely high-functioning casual alcoholic. Not enough to kill me, but also not enough to avoid blood test scares. Not physically dependent after over 20 years, yet mentally locked in due to being an extreme habit person in general. I'm a strict 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. person. Never driven drunk. Never lost time. No problems with work or family. I could stop at any time, I tell myself, if I really wanted to. But I don't really want to. Story 22. The worst thing that happened to me since becoming an adult was becoming an adult. It really feels like the end of one life and the start of another. A life about which I know nothing. Story 23. I haven't seen my friend at all since they still go to school and have to work during the weekends. Honestly, the loneliness is overwhelming, and it hurts to see them go out on Mondays without me. Story 24. I bulged half the discs in my back, which forced me to quit my job and return to finish my undergraduate degree as an adult. It was a very humbling experience. Story 25. I am trying to think of the worst things that have happened to me, and I keep recalling the same unfortunate events. I have lost my home more than once. My wife became ill, and my mom also fell seriously ill. I had to be a caretaker for both, which was a difficult experience. My dad passed away, and my mom chose tenants over me. Story 26. The death of my father has been challenging. He was a single dad, and it has been a tough year. I am grateful to still have my grandmother, but it is difficult knowing I am alone. Story 27. My fiancée became addicted to Destiny 2 and chose gaming until 3 a.m. each night over our relationship. She ended up emotionally cheating with an unemployed individual from her rating group. Avoid dating women who play video games. Story 28. My fiancé had a sudden psychotic break and violently attacked me. I thought he was going to kill me. He went to jail and refused medical help repeatedly. He stalked me for a while but eventually left the state. It has been a year now. I feel like I have emerged from a deep pit. I picked myself up, dusted myself off, and moved on. I am healthier and feel better than I have in years. However, it was hard. We had a long and beautiful relationship that came to a screeching, horrifying, and ultimately unceremonious end. It was hands down the saddest and scariest time of my life. Story 29. My grandfather died suddenly of a heart attack, and less than a year later, my stepmother was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and passed away. They were the glue that held both sides of my divorced family together, and losing them close together left a deep void. The experience instilled a fear of death and disease in me that took years to overcome. Story 30. I was in an abusive relationship. I lost my dream job because we worked together, as he was hired thanks to me. He stayed while I had to leave. I ended up with no job, no apartment, and chronic insomnia. I went to live with my parents and then moved about 8 times in 1 year. Story 31. I had to call my 90-year-old grandpa to tell him that his only son, my dad, was dying. Dad received an unexpected cancer diagnosis and passed away within 2 weeks. Grandpa knew Dad was sick, but he did not realize how serious it was. When Dad took a turn for the worse and had to be intubated and sedated, I called Grandpa to tell him and placed him on speakerphone so they could say goodbye. No parent should ever have to say goodbye to their child. Story 32. The worst and best thing that happened to me was when my partner blindsided me with a breakup last summer. We had been together for nearly 4 years and had signed another year-long lease for the flat we had been living in together for 2 years, just a couple of months prior. I thought things were fine despite a few rough patches due to financial issues and the fact we lived in central London. However, she told me she was unhappy and that things weren't getting better. It was time to split up because she felt too detached. I experienced weeks of constant panic attacks, lost weight, and burst blood vessels in my face from crying, which left permanent marks under my eyelids. I spiraled into a deep self-hatred and spent nearly all my savings trying to get my life back on track. In an attempt to improve things, I forced myself to take actions she had mentioned after the breakup that she wished I had done earlier. I started engaging more with others, attended therapy, and made a conscious effort to live a happier life. Through therapy, I learned to love myself and be kinder to myself, and by engaging more with others, I discovered new hobbies that I now enjoy. In hindsight, the irony is that the things I wasn't doing while we were together were due to my decision to move to London for her work, which led me to constantly compromise on her terms. I was depressed and lost myself entirely. Since then, I have been much happier, and while I do miss the relationship at times, I recognize that I am happier without it. Story 33. The worst thing is realizing I was hiding too much of myself. Adulthood hit me hard with bills, burnout, and being told to tone it down to fit in. But I have always had a playful side. A little tease, a little edge, and a lot of curves, and I finally stopped hiding it. Now, I express myself freely and I get paid for it. My confidence is unlocked. Come see what I mean, but don't say I didn't warn you. Story 34. Adulting means dealing with various challenges such as losing older family members, financial problems, watching your children grow, gaining weight, and losing hair. You know, the usual stuff. Story 35. My mother died in a car accident caused by her husband. I have to take care of him because there is no one else. It is difficult not to feel resentful. Story 36. My parents are getting divorced after 32 years of marriage. My dad cheated on my mom and left with his mistress. He no longer cares to be involved in my life or my siblings' lives after having been such a huge part of our lives for so long. Story 37. I realized I was not the best person in my 20s, and it affected my children. If I had not been busy partying, we could be living in a house instead of a small third-floor apartment. Story 38. I feel so disconnected from my own generation. I faced many health issues in my teens and early 20s which caused me to miss out on a lot. After struggling to regain my health, I have felt incredibly alone ever since. I often wonder why I fought so hard to be healthy again. Story 39. I broke my femur for the second time. The first break was from a motorcycle accident, and it healed incorrectly. I hope that this time, as it heals, I will be able to walk normally without pain or the need for a cane. Story 40. Depression caused by the fact that I may never experience young love or any romantic love at all. Additionally, I'm facing the current financial crisis, which is the second major financial crisis of my adult life, and I'm only 22. Story 41. People dying matters. My grandparents all passed away when I was young. I don't remember 3 of them. One died when I was 9, and I remember her because I had a relationship with her. Other people I knew also passed away. I may have felt a little sad, but it didn't really change my life or truly matter to me. Now, my aunt has died, and 3 years later, I find myself looking forward to dinner at her house. I miss her advice, opinions, and kindness. I am terrified of the day my parents die, beyond terrified. I can't allow myself to think about my wife or in-laws passing away. It's funny. I always thought it wouldn't bother me when I was growing up. Story 42. Realizing that 90% of adulthood is just being tired, juggling bills, pretending you are okay when you are not, and constantly managing relationships that feel more like obligations than genuine connections. Additionally, discovering that your parents were just navigating their lives without a clear plan as well. No one actually has everything together. We are all just growing up with responsibilities and physical challenges. Story 43. I thought my baby was dying from a dog attack. He had to undergo facial surgery. I felt helpless as he seemed to be dying in my arms. Story 44. For us as a couple, the loss of a child early in our marriage and, for me personally, losing both my parents to COVID 1 year apart has been devastating. I'm not sure I can say which is worse. It's all horrific. Story 45. I invested $40,000 in a trade and watched it rise to $160,000 before crashing down to $0. I could have sold, but instead, I sought revenge and took out loans to try to recover my losses, which I couldn't achieve. Now, I am on a debt settlement plan after damaging my credit by defaulting on loans and credit cards. Fortunately, I earn a decent income and do not need a line of credit in the foreseeable future for anything. I still have my house, my wife has her job and inheritance, and her car is paid off, so we are in a good position. I will be out of debt and rebuilding my credit well before my children apply to college. Story 46. Life will be a blessing the moment I can finally get everything in order, so I can relax and be at peace. Story 47. I was assaulted as an adult at the age of 30 by a family member who is not a blood relation, and that had a significant impact on my well-being for several years. I experienced sexual abuse frequently as a child, but when I became an adult, I believed I was strong and safe because I could protect myself and didn't need to rely on anyone. My father passed away shortly after, and it was a challenging few years. Story 48. I had a seizure at 20 and fractured my spine, which left me disabled for life. Most of the time, I am unable to perform a full-time desk job. Story 49. My dad had Lewy body dementia for 4 years, and my sister and I had to take care of him until he could go to a nursing home. It was a difficult experience. Story 50. The death of my son during childbirth was devastating. 1 minute, I was so excited because the moment I had spent 9 months preparing for was finally here. Then it was gone, and I couldn't bring myself to walk into the room I had obsessed over decorating for months. That door remained closed for 6 months. Story 51. I'm stuck in a job that generates great revenue, but I dislike the work. I'm away all the time, and I am technically qualified to do anything else. Story 52. Just one thing? How could I choose only one when so many things have happened? However, I must say that experiencing 3 miscarriages and almost getting kidnapped in another country tops everything else. Story 53. Honestly, life hasn't been bad in the grand scheme of things. I'm not rich, but I don't worry about having enough to eat. My kids don't go hungry. I have faced challenges and setbacks, but overall I've done okay. I don't have a life to brag about, but the problems I have are minor compared to my childhood and how many other parts of the world live. Story 54. Realizing I have a range of undiagnosed issues and a 2-decade-long addiction that has gone unchecked. Who knew? Story 55. My entire town burned to the ground, including my home, my parents' home, and many of my friends' homes, 17,000 structures in total. Following that, the town my cabin is in burned down, but luckily my cabin survived. The next year, my grandma died unexpectedly, and the following year, my grandpa died. That year, my sweet pug also passed away unexpectedly. Shortly after, my uncle died around my birthday. The year after that, my dad fell and shattered his hip, and he hardly walks much anymore. It has been rough since 2018. Story 56. I would have to say that my life in the past 6 months has been the worst thing that has happened to me. I lost my job, I am losing my apartment, and I am moving into my sister's house with her 2 kids. Meanwhile, my parents just went through bankruptcy, are selling their house, and will also be living with my sister once that sale goes through. So time is not on my side. I have a solid resume and job history. I have never had trouble finding work before, but I have applied to over 500 jobs, and I have received maybe 3 Zoom interviews. My pain issues are worse than ever, stress triggers everything, and when one flares up, my immune system crashes right along with it. Right now, I am dealing with full body nerve pain, electric shocks down my arms and legs, and a migraine so severe that I am stuck in a silent room with an ice pack over my eyes and medication that only slightly alleviates the pain. I have to be out of my place by the 28th and haven't packed a single box because of all this pain. I have made to-do lists that will help once I can actually do anything, but still, I have no income and a negative balance in my account, so I am about to start missing credit card payments too. Oh, and my windshield broke, and my crown fell off, and my birthday is next week. So yes, we are really hitting all the greatest hits right now. Story 57, Medical Gaslighting. I was a non-traditional college student. I experienced walking pneumonia so severely that I had to sleep 14 hours daily just to accomplish anything. I almost had to drop out because after over 5 trips to urgent care and the emergency room, no one believed me even after 3 months. I gave up after my second visit, where I explained my thoughts on my condition based on my medical history. Finally, on my 6th visit, a doctor reviewed my history, listened to my symptoms, and prescribed the medication I needed. Just 2 days after starting the medication, I was back to needing only 8 hours of sleep and could stay awake for 16 hours. I spent nearly 4 months requiring 14 hours of sleep to manage 5 hours of low-level activity before needing additional rest. This is just the most extreme example I have. I often have to fight to get doctors to take my symptoms seriously. I have lost count of how many doctors I have seen at this point because they do not believe me when I share my experiences. Story 58. I became an adult. Do you know how hard it is to not fall back on things I said in high school? Every generation has its own language, but I swear I've said, "You only live once" more in the past month, due to my health declining than I ever did as a teenager. For the record, "You Only Live Once" became popular in 2011. So if you need to feel old, think about that before commenting on your health issues. Story 59. I had scarlet fever, and it felt like my skin was melting off. I was in the hospital for a week and received intravenous steroids and antibiotics. It turns out I was allergic to one of the steroids, which caused fluid buildup around my lungs, making it difficult to breathe. The doctors told me that I couldn't breathe because I was overweight and advised me to sleep sitting up. I insisted that I had never had this problem before and urged them to perform an X-ray to examine my lungs. In the end, they found fluid, and I had to undergo an ultrasound-guided fluid extraction with a large needle. My skin ended up purple and peeling. It was a nightmare. Story 60. Kidney failure. I got an infection that turned out to be sepsis, which severely damaged my kidneys. While I was at the emergency room that night, the power went out, trapping me inside because of tornadoes in the area. I was then taken to a larger hospital at 4 a.m., which was an hour and a half away, and underwent several surgeries while I was in a state of panic. Now things are better, but I am on dialysis until I can receive a kidney transplant. On the positive side, this happened right before the COVID-19 pandemic escalated, so I was fortunate in that regard. Story 61. Being sexually assaulted and experiencing 6 miscarriages were incredibly challenging. Thankfully, we now have a miraculous 4-year-old, and life is improving. Story 62. I spent a whole year nearly losing my mom to end-stage kidney failure. It felt very uncertain at times, and I was in an abusive relationship from 2019 to 2022, which I couldn't escape due to COVID. Story 63. Watching my mom plead with me not to let her die while she was in hospice care for terminal cancer after having to live in assisted living due to the effects of alcoholism following her husband's death. Story 64. I lost my husband to cardiac arrest when we were 35. I had to remove him from life support less than 2 hours after I dropped him off at work. Even worse was telling his family and the children. Hearing the primal scream of his father was the worst sound I have ever heard. Story 65. When we came home, we found that my dad had hung himself due to a false medical diagnosis stating he only had a few days left. It turns out the hospital had mistaken him for someone with a very similar name. Story 66. Everything happens for a reason. We may perceive it as good or bad, but ultimately, everything occurs for a reason that we come to understand over time. Story 67. Watching my younger sister struggle with a debilitating rare syndrome while being a mother of 2 children under 4 is agonizing. I would trade places with her in an instant if it meant she could live a normal life. Story 68. My son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He almost died twice. At the same time, my husband was laid off and we spiraled into poverty. Story 69. On November 8, 2018, our house and the entire town we lived in burned down. The worst part was losing our dog and cat in the fire. Although everything we owned was gone, losing them hurt the most. Story 70. My closest friend of 40 years was killed 5 minutes after walking out of his house in broad daylight while crossing the street with the light in a crosswalk. He was struck by a driver of a Silverado with 14 previous moving violations. Her punishment was a $250 fine. Nothing has made sense since then. Story 71. Becoming an orphan and losing your parents and older loved ones is one of the most difficult aspects of aging. Story 72. My first wife had affairs with several of my so-called friends, including my best friend from childhood, while I was serving in Afghanistan. No one informed me when I returned home because they thought I was unstable and would react violently. My trust issues are significant. I now have a different wife and only 2 friends. Story 73. Being thrown out of my house by my brothers on July 10, 2020, was a challenging experience. I was 69 years old and already not in the best of health. Story 74. My mom is becoming seriously mentally ill due to bipolar disorder. It went untreated for a long time, and she was locked in a near-constant manic state. Story 75. Miscarrying twice in 3 months and a hole forming in my jaw, deteriorating at an alarming rate, have made it difficult for me to eat sandwiches correctly, despite having full function this time last year. Another comment mentions a sensitive topic, but it feels so insignificant compared to everything else I've experienced. I know that seems crazy to say, but I have been through so much that this became something I could somehow live with. The flashbacks stopped a while ago. I only experience them occasionally now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.